This story is titled, Caught My Golden Sibling in Bed with My Girlfriend Who I Wanted to Marry. And now, decades later, my kids want to restore family relationships with him because we're still related. Sup, Reddit. My name is Tyler, and I'm 45 years old. Looking at my life now, most people would say I've built something incredible from absolutely nothing. I started as a construction worker straight out of high school, and I worked my ass off for decades to get where I am today. Now, I own 3 successful contracting companies across Florida, and I'm worth about $3.8 million. I own a beautiful house in the hills, drive whatever car I want, and live exactly how I choose to live. But it wasn't always like this. 25 years ago, I was just a broke 22-year-old kid who thought loyalty actually meant something. I still remember everything from that time period with crystal clarity, especially the smell of concrete dust and sweat that would cover my work clothes every single day. I can still recall that particular Thursday evening when I left the construction site, my hands calloused and raw from mixing cement all week long. I had been pulling double shifts for months, just trying to save up every penny I could get my hands on. But despite how exhausted I was, I had something in my wallet that made me grin like an idiot whenever I thought about it. It was my final paycheck, the one that would complete the $2,800 I needed for the engagement ring I'd been saving for. Yeah, $2,800 was absolutely everything to me back then. That might not sound like much now, but when you're making minimum wage and living paycheck to paycheck, it might as well have been $28,000. I was planning to propose to my girlfriend Madison the following weekend at her favorite Italian restaurant downtown. I had it all mapped out in my head. The perfect romantic evening that would start the rest of our lives together. Back then, I was just Tyler, a stupid, naive kid who believed in fairy tales and happy endings. I worked construction during the day, breaking my back under the Florida sun, and lived in a shitty apartment with my older brother Brandon. I was head over heels in love with my college girlfriend Madison, who was studying marketing while I was literally breaking my back building other people's dreams. Brandon and I were incredibly tight back then. He was the smart one in the family, working toward his business degree and always seeming to have everything figured out. Girls were constantly throwing themselves at him because he was a real smooth talker, the kind of guy who could charm anyone into anything. Me? I was the worker, the one who fixed things with his hands and believed in doing things the honest way. When I told Brandon about my proposal plans, he slapped my back enthusiastically and said, "Bro, you're going to make that girl the happiest woman alive." I believed every fucking word he said. Madison and I had been together for 4 years by that point. She had beautiful brown hair that fell down to her shoulders and these incredible green eyes that could make you forget your own name when she looked at you just right. Her smile could light up any room and convince me that I was the luckiest bastard alive to have her in my life. She was the one, or at least that's what I thought at the time. We would spend hours talking about our future together. We'd discuss the house we would eventually buy, the kids we wanted to have, and how I would work my way up in the construction industry until I could own my own company. Meanwhile, she would climb the corporate ladder in marketing, and together we'd build this perfect American dream life. It all seemed so real and achievable when we talked about it lying in bed together on Sunday mornings. That particular Thursday turned out to be different from all the others. My foreman actually let me leave the job site early as a reward for all the overtime I'd been putting in over the past few weeks. I was exhausted but excited, and I decided this would be the perfect opportunity to surprise Madison with something special. I stopped by the local flower shop and bought 24 white roses, her absolute favorite. The flowers cost me $70, which was basically my grocery money for the entire week. But I didn't give a shit about that. I was too happy and too in love to care about the financial sacrifice. I had a key to Madison's apartment, which she'd given me about a year into our relationship. Her roommate Jennifer was usually out on Thursday nights, either at her part-time job or hanging out with her own boyfriend. So I figured this would be the perfect time to surprise Madison with dinner and flowers. Maybe we could have a romantic evening together, and I could even hint at the big surprise that was coming the following weekend. When I walked into the apartment, everything seemed normal at first. The place was quiet, but I could hear music coming from Madison's bedroom. Some slow jazz music that she always liked to play when she was relaxing or studying. The door to her room was cracked open slightly, and I was planning to surprise her by walking in with the roses held behind my back. What I saw when I looked through that crack in the door didn't just break my heart. It fucking destroyed my soul completely. Madison was naked on her bed, and my brother Brandon was on top of her, and they were going at it like wild animals. They were so completely lost in what they were doing that they didn't even notice me standing there in the doorway for what felt like an eternity but was probably only about 10 seconds. The roses fell from my hands and hit the floor with a soft thud. the white petals scattering everywhere like pieces of my life were scattering around me. The sound must have startled them because they immediately jumped apart like they'd been electrocuted. Madison screamed, "Tyler, baby, it's not what it looks like," while frantically grabbing a sheet to cover herself. Brandon stood up without even bothering to cover his dick and had the absolute nerve to say, "Bro, let us explain. This isn't what you think." "How long?" I managed to ask, though my voice sounded like it was coming from someone else entirely. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience, watching this nightmare unfold from somewhere outside myself. They looked at each other with that guilty glance that told me everything I needed to know before they even opened their mouths. 8 months, Brandon finally admitted, still not able to look me in the eye. "But we didn't want to hurt you, man. It just happened." 8 months. 2/3 of a fucking year. While I had been working myself to death, pulling double shifts and saving every penny for an engagement ring, they had been carrying on behind my back. 8 months while this piece of shit brother of mine had been listening to me talk about how much I loved her, how I was planning to propose, and what kind of life we were going to build together. 8 months of lies, deception, and betrayal from the two people I trusted most in the world. I completely lost it. I screamed until my throat was raw and felt like it was bleeding. I grabbed her bedside lamp and threw it against the wall, watching the glass shatter everywhere in a shower of sparks and broken pieces. I told them both that I would rather die than ever see their faces again for as long as I lived. "You knew I was buying you a ring," I yelled at Madison, my voice cracking with rage and heartbreak. "You fucking knew everything, and you did this anyway." I stormed out of that apartment shaking with a combination of rage and betrayal that I'd never experienced before in my life. I drove around the city for hours, just trying to process what had happened, until I finally had to pull over on the side of some random road because I couldn't see through the tears anymore. I sat there in my beat-up truck and cried like I hadn't cried since I was a little kid. The next few weeks were absolute hell. I felt like I was living in some kind of nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I moved out of the apartment I shared with Brandon immediately. I couldn't stand the thought of being in the same space as him for even one more night. I found my own place across town in a shitty neighborhood that I could barely afford on my construction worker salary, but at least it was mine, and it was away from him. I changed my phone number completely and cut off all contact with both of them. I didn't want to hear their excuses, their apologies, or their attempts to justify what they had done to me. As far as I was concerned, they were both dead to me, and I wanted them to stay that way. My parents, predictably, tried to play peacemaker in the whole situation. "Brothers fight, you'll work it out," my mom kept saying whenever I talked to her. My dad just shrugged his shoulders and said, "Time heals everything, son." They acted like this was just some minor disagreement over a football game or something equally trivial. But when Brandon and Madison got engaged just 3 months later, and my entire family acted like it was perfectly normal and acceptable, that's when I realized I was truly alone in this situation. They got married 8 months after I caught them together. It was a big ceremony with the whole family in attendance. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, everyone. I wasn't invited, obviously, but my mother made absolutely sure to tell me all about it in excruciating detail. Brandon looked so handsome in his tuxedo, and Madison was such a beautiful bride, she gushed over the phone. "They're really happy together, Tyler. Maybe it's time for you to move on and find someone new." That conversation was the moment when I made a promise to myself that would define the rest of my life. I would show them all what a massive mistake they had made. I would prove that they had bet on the wrong horse, and that the brother they had written off as just a dumb construction worker was capable of so much more than any of them could imagine. I threw myself into work like a man possessed by some kind of demon. I started taking every job I could possibly find, working 7 days a week and learning every trade that existed in the construction industry. While other guys my age were going out drinking on weekends or watching football, I was studying plumbing, electrical work, roofing, carpentry, you name it. I learned how to do it. While Brandon was sitting in classrooms getting his fancy business degree and learning theoretical concepts from textbooks, I was building real skills in the real world that actually mattered and had value. 2 years after the betrayal, I met Lisa at a small coffee shop near one of my job sites. She was an elementary school teacher, kind, patient, and genuine in a way that was completely different from Madison's flashy, gold-digging personality. Lisa wasn't interested in designer clothes or expensive restaurants. She cared about her students, her family, and building something real and meaningful. We got married 2 years after we met, and we had my daughter Sophie 9 months after that. Sophie became the best thing that ever happened to me, the bright light that made all the pain and hard work worthwhile. Even when Lisa and I divorced amicably when Sophie was 11 years old, we had simply grown apart over the years, no drama or betrayal involved. We kept everything civil and respectful for our daughter's sake. Lisa and I remained friends and co-parents, proving that divorce didn't have to be ugly or destructive when both people acted like adults. But here's the thing that my family never understood. While I was rebuilding my personal life and learning to trust again, I was also systematically building my business empire. I started my first contracting company when I was 27 years old, using every skill I had learned and every connection I had made during those years of working my ass off. Then I started a second company, and then a third. By the time I reached 42 years old, I was pulling in serious money. Not just comfortable middle-class money, but the kind of wealth that changes everything about how you live your life. Meanwhile, Brandon's fancy business degree had gotten him a middle management position at some insurance company where he was making mediocre money and going nowhere fast. Madison worked part-time at a boutique, spending more money than she was making on designer clothes and accessories to maintain an image they couldn't actually afford. They had 2 kids together and lived in a basic suburban house, drove used cars that were always breaking down, and constantly struggled with bills and debt. There was nothing wrong with that kind of life. It's how most people live. But it wasn't the success story they thought they were writing when they betrayed me all those years ago. For 25 long years, I never spoke to either Brandon or Madison again. At family gatherings, I would deliberately stay on the opposite side of the room from them. And if someone even mentioned their names in conversation, I would immediately change the subject or simply walk away. My family eventually learned that Brandon and Madison were my absolute red line. Cross it, and I was gone from whatever event or conversation was happening. It was non-negotiable. Sophie grew up knowing that she had an uncle and aunt that she had never met, and probably never would meet. I never badmouthed them to her directly because I didn't want to poison her mind with adult problems. But I just told her that we had some serious differences and left it at that. She was smart enough not to push the issue, especially as she got older and could sense that this was not a topic I was willing to discuss under any circumstances. Honestly, Sophie had everything she could possibly need anyway. I made sure of that. She went to private school, had a college fund that was fully paid for before she even started high school, got a nice car for her 16th birthday, and we took family vacations to Europe every summer. She never wanted for anything material, and more importantly, she had a father who was present and involved in her life. She had stability, security, and unconditional love. Then, about 3 months ago, Sophie dropped a bomb on me that would change everything. We were having our usual Sunday brunch at the country club, something we'd been doing together since she was little, when she casually said, "Dad, I want them at my wedding." I nearly choked on my coffee and had to set the cup down before I dropped it. "What are you talking about?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling in my stomach that I already knew exactly what she meant. "Uncle Brandon and Aunt Madison," she said matter-of-factly. "I want them at my wedding next year." Sophie had gotten engaged to Kevin about 6 months earlier. Kevin was a marketing manager who made good money and treated my daughter with the respect and love she deserved. I was paying for the entire wedding, and we were talking about a $95,000 event at the best venue in the city. Everything was planned and perfect. "Absolutely not," I said firmly, my voice probably sharper than I intended. "Dad, it's been 25 years, Sophie said, leaning forward with that determined look she gets when she's made up her mind about something. "Don't you think it's time to get over whatever happened between you all? Get over it. Like it was some minor disagreement about a football game or a business deal gone wrong. You don't understand what they did to me," I told her. "So explain it to me," she challenged. "I've been following Madison on Instagram for years and she seems really nice. Their kids look sweet and well-behaved. Why can't we all just be a family again?" That's when I realized what had been happening behind my back. My mother had been showing Sophie pictures and filling her head with ideas about this perfect family reunion bullshit. My own mother had been undermining me and feeding my daughter information about people who had destroyed my life. "If you invite them to your wedding, I won't be there," I said, as firmly and calmly as I could manage. Sophie's eyes widened in shock. "Are you serious? You would actually miss your only daughter's wedding over some old grudge?" "It's not a grudge, Sophie. It's called having self-respect and maintaining boundaries." She stood up abruptly, threw her napkin down on the table, and looked at me with a mixture of anger and disappointment that cut me to the core. "Fine then. I'll pay for my own wedding. I don't need your money or your approval." And with that, she stormed out of the restaurant, leaving me sitting there alone, wondering if I had just made the biggest mistake of my entire life. For the next 2 weeks, Sophie and I didn't speak to each other. It was the longest we had ever gone without talking since she was born, and it was killing me inside. I kept picking up the phone to call her, then putting it back down. Part of me wondered if maybe I was being too stubborn, too unforgiving. Maybe I should just swallow my pride, let them come to the wedding, and move on with my life like everyone seemed to think I should do. Then, 2 weeks after our argument, I came home from a job site one evening and found cars in my driveway that I didn't recognize. My heart sank immediately because I had a pretty good idea what this meant. I walked into my house and there they were, sitting in my living room like they owned the place. Sophie, Brandon, and Madison, having what appeared to be a very cozy conversation. Brandon had aged badly as fuck. His hairline had retreated all the way to the back of his skull, leaving him looking like a monk who had given up on life. He had put on at least 70 pounds since I last saw him, and his cheap suit looked like he had bought it at some discount store during a clearance sale. The whole package screamed middle-aged failure in a way that was almost painful to witness. Madison, on the other hand, was a completely different story. She had clearly had extensive work done. Fake tits, Botox, probably a facelift, the whole 9 yards. She was dressed in designer clothes that I knew damn well they couldn't afford on their combined income. She was still trying to look like the hot young thing she was 25 years ago. But instead, she was coming off more like a desperate housewife who was fighting a losing battle against time and gravity. "What the fuck is this?" I asked, not bothering to hide my anger or surprise. "Dad, please," Sophie said quickly, jumping up from her seat. "Just hear them out, okay?" Brandon stood up too, trying to look confident and in control, but I could see his hands shaking slightly. "Tyler, I know we have a lot to talk about," he said, in what was obviously a rehearsed speech. "No, we don't," I replied immediately. "Get out of my house, now." Madison stood up as well, and that's when her true colors really started to show. I could see her eyes scanning my living room, taking in the expensive furniture, the artwork on the walls, and all the other obvious signs of wealth and success. It was like watching a predator sizing up its prey. "Oh, come on, Tyler," she said with this fake sweetness in her voice that made my skin crawl. "We're family. Can't we just put the past behind us and move forward like mature adults?" Her voice had this artificially sweet tone that was so obviously calculated and manipulative. She was eyeing everything in my house like she was mentally calculating what it was all worth, probably wondering how much money I had and how she could get her hands on some of it. "You see, Tyler," she continued, settling back into her chair like she was planning to stay for a while. "Brandon and I have been going through a bit of a rough patch financially lately. The kids need braces, and we have some credit card debt that we're trying to deal with. And we heard from family members about how incredibly well you've done for yourself over the years." There it was. The real reason for this unexpected visit. They weren't here to reconcile or apologize or make amends for what they had done to me 25 years ago. They were here because they thought I was their personal lottery ticket, their solution to whatever financial problems they had created for themselves. "Are you fucking kidding me?" I said, unable to hide my disgust and disbelief. "Sophie told us about the wedding." Brandon jumped in quickly, clearly trying to control the narrative. "And maybe we could help with the planning process. You know, family should stick together during important events like this. And if you needed any financial assistance or advice..." Financial assistance from these two losers? I started laughing. Not because anything was funny, but because the sheer audacity of what they were suggesting was so absurd that I couldn't help myself. "Do you have any idea what I'm actually worth?" I asked them. Madison's eyes lit up like dollar signs had appeared in front of her face. "Well, we know you've done very well for yourself," she said, leaning forward eagerly. "And family should help family, right? I mean, Sophie is getting married, and weddings are so incredibly expensive these days. We thought maybe we could all work together to make this the perfect day for her." "Get out," I said, my voice deadly calm and controlled. "Get out of my house right now before I call the police and have you removed." Sophie started crying at that point, tears streaming down her face as she looked back and forth between me and them. "Dad, they're trying to apologize," she said through her sobs. "Apologize?" I said, my voice rising. "They haven't said one single word about what they actually did to me. They're here because they think I'm their personal lottery ticket." Madison's carefully constructed mask slipped for just a second, and I saw the real her underneath. Greedy, calculating, and completely entitled. "Look, Tyler, what happened between us was a very long time ago," she said, her fake sweetness starting to crack around the edges. "We were young. We made mistakes. People do stupid things when they're kids. But Brandon and I are married now. We have children together, and we could really use some help getting back on our feet financially." "Help getting back on your feet?" I asked incredulously. "What the hell have you two been doing for the past 25 years?" Brandon looked embarrassed and ashamed, but Madison just kept going like a freight train. "Well, Brandon's job doesn't pay quite as much as we thought it would when he first got it," she said matter-of-factly. "And raising kids is incredibly expensive these days. You know how it is. Plus, we made some bad investments a few years back that didn't work out the way we hoped they would." "So you thought you'd come to the brother you fucked over and destroyed and ask for a handout?" I said, my voice dripping with contempt. "It's not a handout," Madison snapped, and now her fake sweetness was disappearing completely. "You're family, and honestly, you've done well enough financially that helping us out wouldn't even make a dent in your bank account." That's when I finally realized what kind of person Madison really was, and what kind of person she had always been underneath that pretty exterior. She was a gold-digging, entitled princess who saw everyone around her as potential ATMs, people who existed solely to fund her lifestyle and solve her problems. She hadn't changed one bit in 25 years. "Sophie," I said, not taking my eyes off these two parasites who had invaded my home, "if you want them at your wedding, you can pay for it yourself. And you can find yourself a new father figure while you're at it, because I'm done with this family reunion bullshit." I walked out of my own living room and went to my home office, locking the door behind me and trying to calm down before I did something I would regret. I could hear them arguing loudly for another 20 minutes or so before they finally left. The sound of car doors slamming and engines starting was like music to my ears. Sophie didn't speak to me for 6 weeks after that confrontation. I'll be completely honest. Those 6 weeks were absolutely brutal for me. I missed my daughter like crazy, and part of me wondered constantly if maybe I was being too stubborn and unforgiving. Maybe I should just swallow my pride, let them come to the wedding, and move on with my life like everyone seemed to think I should do. Then I got a phone call that changed absolutely everything. "Tyler, this is Roberto Martinez," the voice on the other end said. Roberto was an old family friend who used to work with my dad years ago. He had always been straight with me throughout my life, never sugarcoated anything, and I respected his opinion. "I know this isn't really my business," he continued, "but I think you should know something important about Brandon and Madison." My grip tightened on the phone. "What about them?" "I was at O'Malley's bar last week having a beer after work," Roberto explained, "and I overheard them talking to your cousin Danny at a table near mine. They were planning something, and I don't think you're going to like what I heard." "Planning what exactly?" "They're broke, Tyler. Really, truly broke. Brandon lost his job about 6 months ago, and they're about to lose their house to foreclosure. Madison's been making some really big purchases on credit cards, thinking that Brandon would get a promotion that never came through." My blood started to boil as I listened to this. "But here's the real kicker," Roberto continued. "They're not trying to reconcile with you out of any genuine remorse or desire to make things right. Madison actually said, and I quote this exactly, 'Once Tyler forgives us publicly at the wedding, we can start asking him for real money. He's worth millions and we're family. He'll have to help us out.'" The phone creaked in my grip as I squeezed it tighter. She said they figured if they could get Sophie on their side first, you'd have no choice but to give in to the pressure. And once you did, they planned to milk you for everything they could possibly get. I hung up the phone and sat in my office for a long time, just thinking about everything Roberto had told me. Then I started making some phone calls of my own. You see, when you have money and you've built a solid network over 22 years in business, you can find out pretty much anything about anyone if you really want to. I hired a private investigator. It cost me $6,000, but it was worth every single penny for what I learned. The report I got back a week later was absolutely beautiful in its thoroughness and detail. Brandon hadn't just lost his job like they had told me. He had been fired for sexual harassment. There had been 3 different complaints from female coworkers over a period of several months. The company had settled quietly with the women to avoid any negative publicity, but Brandon was completely blacklisted in the insurance industry. No one would touch him with a 10-foot pole. Madison had run up $52,000 in credit card debt buying designer clothes and jewelry, trying desperately to maintain an image and lifestyle that they couldn't actually afford. She was living in a complete fantasy world, spending money like she was still the young, beautiful college girl that men would shower with gifts and attention. They were 4 months behind on their mortgage payments and facing imminent foreclosure. Their cars were about to be repossessed by the bank, and they owed the IRS $28,000 in back taxes that they had been ignoring for over a year. But the absolute best part of the entire report, the cherry on top of this disaster sundae, was that Madison had been cheating on Brandon for 2 years with her personal trainer. His name was Jake. He was 27 years old, built like a bodybuilder, drove a motorcycle, and still lived in his mother's basement. The private investigator had photos, hotel receipts, credit card statements, Everything you could possibly want as evidence. That's when I decided it was time for my revenge. Real, calculated, devastating revenge. I called Sophie and told her that I had changed my mind completely. I was ready to reconcile with Brandon and Madison, and they could absolutely come to the wedding with my full blessing. Really, Dad? You actually mean it? She asked, and I could hear the relief and happiness in her voice. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, I told her. Maybe it really is time to let go of the past and move forward as a family. She was so happy that she started crying tears of joy over the phone. We met for lunch the next day and started planning the wedding again. I told her I would cover all the costs, just like I had originally promised. And that money was no object when it came to making her day perfect. There's just one thing I'd like to do, I said casually. I want to handle this reconciliation the right way. I want to have Brandon and Madison over to my house for dinner before the wedding. Just the four of us adults. No kids, no distractions. We can clear the air properly, talk through everything that happened, and maybe we can all start fresh as a real family. Sophie thought that was the most wonderful idea she had ever heard. I called Brandon personally and put on my very best reconciliation voice. Brandon, this is Tyler, I said when he answered. Look, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and Sophie's absolutely right. It's time we put the past behind us like mature adults. He was so shocked that he could barely speak coherently. Tyler, Wow. Really? You actually mean that? I really do, I said convincingly. I'd like to have you and Madison over for dinner this Saturday night. Just the four of us, no kids around to distract us. We can talk things through properly, clear the air, and maybe start over with a clean slate. That sounds absolutely amazing, man, Brandon said, and I could hear the excitement and relief in his voice. Madison is going to be absolutely thrilled when I tell her. I bet she was. That week, I had my house professionally deep cleaned from top to bottom. I hired an expensive catering company to prepare an elaborate dinner. Prime rib, lobster tail, the finest wines, the whole elegant spread. I also had my security system upgraded with new cameras that covered every single angle of my house, with crystal clear audio recording capabilities. Saturday night arrived, and they showed up right on time, probably because they were so eager to get this reconciliation started. Brandon was wearing what looked like his only decent suit, the same cheap one he'd worn to my house the first time, but at least he'd had it dry cleaned. Madison had poured herself into a tight black dress that probably cost more than their monthly mortgage payment, which they apparently weren't paying anyway. Tyler! Madison gushed as she walked through my front door, giving me a hug that lasted way too long and felt completely inappropriate. Your house is absolutely gorgeous. You've really done incredibly well for yourself. Brandon was looking around my entryway like a kid in a candy store, his eyes wide as he took in the expensive artwork, the marble floors, and the crystal chandelier. Jesus Christ, bro, this place must be worth a fortune, he said with obvious awe in his voice. It's home, I said modestly, playing my part perfectly. Come on, let's go eat. We have a lot to catch up on after all these years. Dinner started off friendly enough, just like I had planned. We talked about Sophie's upcoming wedding, their kids, general small talk about life and how things had changed over the years. But I could see Madison getting more and more comfortable as the evening progressed, and that's when her true nature started coming out, just like I knew it would. So, Tyler, she said while cutting into her lobster tail, Sophie told us that you own 3 construction companies now. That must be incredibly profitable for you. I do all right, I said with false modesty. Oh, come on, she laughed, gesturing around my elaborate dining room with its expensive furniture and artwork. This is way more than just all right. You must be worth what, several $1 million at this point? Brandon looked embarrassed by her directness, but he didn't stop her or tell her to change the subject. I don't really like to discuss my personal finances, I said diplomatically. Of course, she said quickly. I'm just saying it's absolutely amazing how successful you've become over the years. And here Brandon and I are, still struggling to make ends meet like a couple of kids fresh out of college. Here we go, I thought to myself, right on schedule. The economy has been really tough on everyone, Brandon added weakly, clearly trying to support his wife's narrative. It really has been brutal, Madison agreed enthusiastically, especially with Brandon being out of work right now. The job market is just terrible. You're unemployed? I asked, pretending like I didn't already know every detail of their financial disaster. Just temporarily, Brandon said quickly, his face flushing red. I'm interviewing for some really great positions. Something should come through soon. Madison jumped in immediately. The thing is, Tyler, we're in a bit of a tight spot financially right now. Nothing too serious, but you know how it is with kids and mortgages and all the expenses of daily life. I'm sure things will turn around for you both, I said sympathetically. Oh, I know they will, Madison said, reaching over to touch my arm in what she probably thought was an intimate, persuasive gesture. Especially now that we're all family again and working together. I mean, family helps family, right? That's what families do for each other. There it was. The moment I had been waiting for. What exactly are you asking me? I said, even though I knew perfectly well what was coming. Madison exchanged a meaningful look with Brandon, then turned back to me with her biggest, most charming smile. Well, we were thinking that maybe you could help us out a little bit financially. Just temporarily, of course, until Brandon finds a new job and we get back on our feet. We'd pay you back every penny, of course, Brandon added quickly. With interest if you want. How much money are we talking about? I asked. Maybe $60,000, Madison said like she was asking me to pass the salt. I know it probably sounds like a lot to someone who's never had money, but it's really not that much when you think about it objectively. I nearly choked on my wine. $60,000 just like that. $60,000, I repeated slowly. I know it sounds like a lot, Brandon said nervously. But we're really desperate here, Tyler. We might actually lose the house if we don't get some help soon. And it's not like you don't have it, Madison added, her mask starting to slip just a little bit. I mean, look at this place. You probably spent $60,000 just on your landscaping. I leaned back in my chair, pretending to consider their request seriously. So let me get this straight, I said slowly. You two betrayed me in the worst possible way 25 years ago. Never actually apologized for what you did. And now you want me to give you $60,000. We are apologizing, Madison said quickly. We're here, aren't we? We're trying to make things right between all of us. By asking for money, I replied. By trying to rebuild our relationship as a family, Brandon said earnestly. The money is just temporary help between brothers. Family supporting family during a difficult time. Madison leaned forward across the table, her cleavage practically spilling out of her dress in what was obviously a calculated move. Tyler, honey, we all made mistakes when we were young and stupid. But look at us now. We're all mature adults who can put the past behind us. Can't we focus on the future instead of dwelling on ancient history? You're absolutely right, I said, standing up from my chair. Let's focus on the future. I have something I want to show you both. I walked over to my entertainment center and pulled out a manila envelope that I had prepared earlier. What's that? Brandon asked with obvious curiosity. The future, I said matter-of-factly, sitting back down at the table. I opened the envelope and pulled out the private investigator's report, watching as Madison's face went completely pale, and Brandon looked confused and nervous. Did you know, I said in a conversational tone, like I was discussing the weather, that Brandon here was fired for sexual harassment? 3 different women, Brandon. 3 separate complaints filed against you with HR. That was all just a misunderstanding, Brandon stammered, his face turning red. And Madison, I continued, turning to look directly at her. Did you know that your wife has run up $52,000 in credit card debt buying designer clothes and jewelry? Or that she's been fucking her personal trainer for the past 2 years? The silence in the room was absolutely deafening. Madison's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, while Brandon looked like he was going to vomit all over my expensive dining room table. Oh, and here's my personal favorite part, I said cheerfully, pulling out a photograph from the envelope. This is Madison and Jake at the Marriott downtown last Tuesday afternoon. Nice position, by the way. Very athletic and flexible. Brandon grabbed the photograph from my hand and stared at it, his face cycling through every color of the rainbow. First pale, then red, then purple with rage. You fucking bitch, he whispered to Madison, his voice barely audible. Brandon, I can explain everything, Madison started desperately. It's not what it looks like. Explain what exactly? Brandon exploded. How you've been cheating on me while we're going broke? While I've been humiliating myself begging my brother for money to save our house? I think you two need to leave my house right now, I said calmly, like I was suggesting they might want to check the weather before driving home. But Madison wasn't finished yet. Her fake sweetness was completely gone now, replaced by pure, entitled rage. You bastard, she screamed at me, standing up so fast that her chair nearly tipped over. You set us up. You knew about Jake all along, and you humiliated me on purpose. I humiliated you? I asked with genuine surprise. You humiliated yourself, Madison. I just documented it. We needed that money, she shrieked. We're going to lose everything we have. That's not my problem, I replied simply. She stood up, her face twisted with fury and desperation. You think you're so much better than us, don't you? You think your shit doesn't stink just because you have money? I think I'm better than you because I have integrity, I said calmly. There's a difference. Integrity? She laughed bitterly. You're just a bitter old man who can't let go of the past. You've been planning this revenge for 25 years, haven't you? Actually, I've been planning it for about 2 weeks, I said with a smile. But I have to admit it's been very satisfying to execute. Brandon was still staring at the photograph, completely broken and defeated. But Madison was just getting started with her meltdown. You know what? Fine, she spat. We don't need your money. We don't need you. But don't think this is over between us. Oh, but it is over, I said firmly, because you're never getting near me or my daughter again. That's when she really lost her mind completely. Your daughter? Your precious little Princess Sophie? Do you want to know what she really thinks of you? She told me you're a cold, controlling asshole who uses money to manipulate people. I smiled and pulled out my phone. Did she say that? That's interesting because that must have been before she found out what kind of people you really are. Madison looked confused. What do you mean? I played a recording on my phone, and Sophie's voice came through crystal clear. Dad, I owe you a huge apology. Roberto Martinez called me and told me exactly what he heard at O'Malley's bar. I can't believe I fell for their act. They're not trying to reconcile with our family. They just want money. I'm so sorry I put you through this. Madison's face went completely white. That was recorded 3 days ago, I said. Sophie knows everything now. You're lying, Madison whispered. I played another recording. This one was Sophie's voice talking to someone else, probably on the phone. No, Madison, you're not invited to my wedding anymore. I know what you really wanted from my dad, and I'm disgusted by both of you. Don't ever contact me again. Brandon finally looked up from the photograph. Sophie knows about Jake. Sophie knows about everything, I confirmed. The debt, the cheating, the harassment charges, all of it. So does the rest of the family, by the way. I sent copies of the private investigator's report to everyone. Your kids will probably hear about it at school on Monday. Madison screamed at that point. Actually screamed like a banshee, a sound that was so shrill and desperate that it made my ears ring. You fucking monster! You've ruined our lives! No, I said, standing up slowly and looking down at both of them. You ruined your own lives. I just documented it for everyone to see. Now get out of my house before I call the police and have you both arrested for trespassing. Brandon stood up slowly, still holding the photograph in his trembling hands. He looked at Madison with pure, undiluted hatred. The kind of look that can end a marriage in a single moment. 25 years, he said quietly. 25 years I've been married to a lying, cheating bitch. Brandon, please, Madison started desperately. Let me explain what really happened. Shut up, Brandon said, his voice deadly calm. Just shut the fuck up. I don't want to hear another word from you. He turned to face me, and I could see genuine remorse in his eyes for the first time in decades. Tyler, I'm sorry for everything. For what we did to you 25 years ago. For coming here tonight with our hands out, for all of it. It's too late for sorry, Brandon, I said simply. He nodded slowly. I know it is. Come on, Madison, let's go, he said, heading toward the door. But Madison wasn't done with her meltdown yet. She grabbed a wine glass from the table and threw it at me with all her strength, missing me by just a few inches. It shattered against the wall behind me, sending glass flying everywhere. I hope you're happy, she screamed at the top of her lungs. I hope you die alone and miserable. I'll die rich and respected, I replied calmly. Can you say the same thing about yourself? My security cameras caught everything. The whole beautiful meltdown was recorded in high definition for posterity. They left that night, and I honestly never expected to see either of them again. But life had more surprises in store for me. Brandon filed for divorce the very next week. Apparently, the private investigator's report made it incredibly easy for his lawyer to prove adultery and financial irresponsibility in court. Brandon got full custody of the kids, and Madison got absolutely nothing from the settlement. She had to move back in with her parents at 46 years old, like a teenager who had screwed up her life. Their house went into foreclosure within a month. Brandon had to declare bankruptcy to deal with all the debt that Madison had accumulated. The IRS started garnishing whatever wages he could find from odd jobs around town. But the best part of the whole situation was that Madison's personal trainer, Jake, dumped her immediately as soon as the scandal broke and became public knowledge. Apparently, he wasn't interested in dating a broke middle-aged woman with no prospects and a destroyed reputation. Sophie's wedding 6 months later was absolutely beautiful. The guest list was smaller without Brandon's side of the family being included, but it was filled with people who actually cared about us and wanted to celebrate our happiness. I walked my daughter down the aisle with genuine pride, and she thanked me in her wedding speech for always protecting our family from people who would try to take advantage of our love and generosity. For 6 months after the wedding, I didn't hear anything from Brandon or Madison. I assumed they had both slunk away to rebuild their lives somewhere else, maybe in a different state where nobody knew about their scandals. I was completely wrong about that assumption. It was a Tuesday morning when my secretary buzzed me at the office. "Mr. Tyler, there's a Brandon Thompson here to see you," she said through the intercom. "He says he's your brother." I hadn't heard that name spoken in my office ever. Brandon had never even seen my businesses or known where I worked. "Send him in," I said after a moment. Brandon walked into my office looking like a completely broken man. His clothes were wrinkled and cheap, clearly from a discount store. He had lost a significant amount of weight, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks or maybe even months. "Tyler," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "What do you want, Brandon?" I asked directly. He sat down across from my desk and put his head in his hands like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "I'm desperate, man. Completely and utterly desperate." "I figured as much," I said. "You wouldn't be here otherwise." "It's not for me," he said quickly, looking up at me with desperation in his eyes. "It's for my kids, Tyler and Ashley. They're 17 and 15 years old, and they're living with me in a one-bedroom apartment above a pizza shop. Tyler's supposed to start his senior year of high school next month, but we can't afford school supplies or new clothes. Ashley needs a dress for homecoming, and I can't even buy her a $6 sandwich for lunch at school." He looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. "I know what I did to you. I know I don't deserve anything from you after everything that's happened. But those kids are completely innocent in all this mess. They didn't ask for their parents to be complete fuck-ups." I leaned back in my chair and studied his face. "Where's Madison in all of this?" "Gone," he said simply. "She moved to Arizona with some guy she met online. She sends a Christmas card if the kids are lucky, but that's about it. She doesn't pay child support, doesn't call, nothing. She's completely out of the picture. And you think I should help you because you're a good man, Tyler. Better than me, better than I ever was or ever will be." He was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. "I destroyed my own life, and I can live with the consequences of that. But my kids are suffering because of my mistakes, and I can't fix it alone. I've tried everything." "What exactly are you asking for?" I said, watching him carefully. "Just enough to get the kids through school," he said desperately. "Maybe help with rent so we can get a 2-bedroom place where they can have some privacy and dignity. I'm not asking for handouts or charity. I'll work. I'll do anything you need. Construction, cleaning, whatever kind of work you have available. I'll pay you back every penny, I swear to God." "How much money are we talking about?" Maybe $2,500 a month," he said quietly. "Just until I can get back on my feet properly and find steady work." $2,500 a month for how long? Until Tyler graduates high school and gets a job of his own. Maybe 2 years at most. I did the math quickly in my head. $60,000 total. Exactly the same amount they had asked for at the dinner. But this time, it was for a completely different reason. "And what makes you think you won't fuck me over again?" I asked bluntly. Brandon met my eyes directly for the first time since he had sat down in my office. "Because I've already lost everything that ever mattered to me," he said with complete sincerity. "My wife, my house, my career, my reputation, it's all gone. The only thing I have left in this world is my kids. And if you help me keep them safe and fed and in school, I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful to you." I let him sit there in complete silence for a full minute, just watching him squirm while I pretended to consider his request. "I'll think about it," I finally said. "Tyler, he started. "I said I'll think about it," I interrupted firmly. "I'll give you an answer in exactly 1 week." He nodded and stood up slowly. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Just thank you for even considering it after everything that's happened." After he left my office, I sat there for a long time thinking about the situation. Part of me wanted to tell him to go fuck himself and never darken my doorway again. But another part of me kept thinking about those kids. Innocent teenagers living in a 1-bedroom apartment above a pizza shop because their parents were complete idiots who had destroyed their own lives. 3 days later, Madison showed up at my office. My secretary buzzed me again with obvious irritation in her voice. "Mr. Tyler, there's a Madison Thompson here to see you. She's being very insistent and won't take no for an answer." "Jesus Christ," I muttered. "Send her in." Madison walked into my office and I barely recognized the woman who entered. The expensive designer clothes were completely gone, replaced by jeans and a t-shirt that looked like they came from Walmart. Her hair was fried and damaged from too much cheap bleach, and she had gained at least 35 pounds since the last time I saw her. The expensive cosmetic work she'd had done was starting to sag and settle in unnatural ways, making her look significantly older than her 46 years. "Hello, Tyler," she said, trying to sound confident but failing miserably. "Madison, what brings you to my office?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. She sat down across from my desk without being invited, which immediately annoyed me. "I heard that Brandon came to see you," she said. "Did he?" "I know what he asked you for. Help with the kids and their expenses." She leaned forward across my desk, and I could see her trying to turn on whatever charm she thought she still possessed. "Tyler, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye about things, but those kids are my children too." "The kids you abandoned," I said flatly. "I didn't abandon them," she said defensively. "I just needed some space to figure out my life and what I wanted for my future." "In Arizona with your new boyfriend." Her face flushed red with embarrassment. "That didn't work out the way I hoped it would." "What a shocking surprise," I said sarcastically. "Look, Tyler, Brandon can't take care of those kids alone," she said, her voice getting more shrill and desperate. "He's working at a fucking Home Depot now making $13 an hour. Those kids need their mother in their lives." "They needed their mother when you were cheating on their father and running up $50,000 in credit card debt," I replied. "That's all in the past now," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "I'm here now, and I want to be part of the solution moving forward." "What exactly are you proposing?" She took a deep breath, and I could see her shifting into full manipulation mode. "I think the kids should come live with me in Arizona. I have a nice apartment there, and there are good schools nearby. Brandon can visit them whenever he wants, of course." "And how exactly would you support them?" "Well," she said, biting her lip nervously, "I was hoping that maybe you might help with that situation. Just temporarily, of course, until I can get back on my feet." "Help how?" "Maybe $6,000 a month," she said, like she was asking me to pass the salt. "Just until I can find steady work. The job market is really tough out there right now." $6,000 a month. More than double what Brandon had asked for to take care of his own children. And what about Brandon in all this? "Brandon?" she said, waving her hand dismissively again. "Brandon's a loser, Tyler. He always was and he always will be. He can barely take care of himself, let alone two teenagers with real needs and ambitions. Those kids need a mother who can provide for them properly and give them real opportunities. A mother who abandoned them when things got difficult." "I made mistakes," she snapped, her fake composure starting to crack. "We all make mistakes in life, but I'm here now, and I'm trying to make things right for everyone involved. By taking the kids away from their father and asking me for $6,000 a month. It's not taking them away," she said defensively. "It's giving them better opportunities for their futures. And $6,000 is absolutely nothing to you, Tyler. You probably spend that much money on wine in a single month." And there was the real Madison, still showing through after all this time. Still entitled, still greedy, still thinking that everyone owed her something just because she existed. "Let me ask you something, Madison," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Have you actually talked to Tyler and Ashley about this brilliant plan of yours?" "Well, no, but," she started. "Because I have," I interrupted. "I had lunch with them last week." Her face went completely pale. "You what?" "I wanted to meet my nephew and niece personally, see what kind of kids they were, what they were like as people. You want to know what they told me about you?" She didn't answer, just stared at me with growing dread. Tyler said, and I quote exactly, "Uncle Tyler, I never want to see that woman again. She destroyed our family and then abandoned us when we needed her most." I paused to let that sink in. Ashley said, "She's not my mom anymore. A real mom doesn't abandon her children when things get tough." Madison's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Those kids hate you, Madison, and honestly, I don't blame them one bit." Madison's face crumpled and she started crying. Big, ugly sobs that smeared what little makeup she was wearing. "That's not fair," she choked out between sobs. "I'm their mother. I gave birth to them." "No, you're the woman who gave birth to them," I corrected. "There's a significant difference between giving birth and being a mother." She started crying harder, the tears streaming down her face. "Tyler, please," she begged. "I have absolutely nothing left. My boyfriend in Arizona kicked me out of his apartment. I'm living in a cheap motel room. I can't find work anywhere. I desperately need help." "You need help?" I asked with mock surprise. "What about when Brandon needed help keeping his marriage together while you were fucking your personal trainer? What about when I needed help 25 years ago when my brother and girlfriend betrayed me in the worst possible way? I was young and stupid back then," she said desperately. "You were 22 then," I replied. "You're 46 now. What's your excuse for abandoning your children and destroying your family this time around?" She wiped her nose with the back of her hand like a child. "I made a mistake, okay? I thought I could start over fresh and be happy with someone new. But it didn't work out the way I planned. So now you want to come back and play mommy when it's convenient for you. I want to make things right, she insisted. I stood up and walked around my desk, looking down at her pathetic, broken form. You want to make things right? Here's exactly how you make things right. You disappear completely. You sign over full legal custody to Brandon. You don't ask for a single penny from anyone. And you let those kids heal from all the damage you've done to them. I can't do that, she whispered. Then you get absolutely nothing from me. She looked up at me with pure desperation in her eyes. Tyler, please. I'm literally begging you here. I'll do anything you want. Anything? I asked. Yes, anything at all. I walked back to my desk and pulled out a piece of paper that I'd prepared earlier, just in case this exact scenario played out. Sign this. What is it? A legal document formally renouncing all parental rights to Tyler and Ashley. Sign it, and I'll give you $12,000 to disappear forever and never contact this family again. She stared at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. $12,000? That's it? That's more than you deserve. But Brandon's getting $2,500 a month. Brandon is actually taking care of his children, I explained patiently. You abandoned yours to chase some fantasy in Arizona. She was quiet for a long moment, just staring at the document. What if I don't sign it? Then you get absolutely nothing, I said simply. And I make sure that every potential employer in whatever city you end up in knows exactly what kind of person you are. Her hands were shaking violently as she picked up the pen. This isn't fair, she said quietly. Fair? I asked with genuine amazement. You want to talk about what's fair? Fair would be you rotting in hell for what you've done to your family. She signed the paper with a trembling hand. I wrote her a check for $12,000 and handed it to her. This is the last money you'll ever see from me or anyone else in this family, I said firmly. If you ever try to contact Brandon or those kids again, I'll have you arrested for harassment. She took the check and stood up slowly. You know what, Tyler? You're absolutely right about one thing. I am a shitty mother and a shitty person. But you're not much better than the rest of us. How's that? You've let hate and revenge consume your entire life. Maybe I'm a terrible person, but at least I'm not spending every waking moment plotting against people who wronged me decades ago. Maybe you're just as miserable as the rest of us. Maybe I am, I said with a shrug. But I sleep well at night knowing I have integrity. Do you? Because I think you're just as miserable and empty inside as everyone else you look down on. She walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. For what it's worth, I really did love you once. Back when we were young kids who didn't know any better. No, you didn't, I said firmly. You loved what you thought I could give you. Just like with Brandon. Just like with Jake. Just like with every man you've ever been with. You don't love people, you use them. She left without another word, and I never saw her again. A week later, I called Brandon and told him to come back to my office. He walked in looking nervous and anxious, probably expecting me to tell him no and crush whatever hope he had left for his children's future. I've made my decision about helping you, I said without any preamble. He held his breath, waiting for what he was sure would be bad news. I'm not going to give you $2,500 a month, I said. His face fell completely, and I could see the devastation in his eyes. I'm going to give you $3,500 a month, I continued. Plus, I'm paying for both kids' college tuition when the time comes. Brandon stared at me like I had just spoken to him in a completely foreign language. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. There are conditions, though, I continued before he could respond. You're going to work for me. I'm putting you in charge of maintenance for all three of my companies. It's honest work, it pays well, and it comes with full health insurance for you and the kids. Tyler, I don't know what to say, he stammered, tears starting to form in his eyes. Say you'll take it seriously, I replied. Say you'll be the father those kids deserve to have. I will, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. I swear to God I will. And Brandon, I added, Madison signed over her parental rights to you. She's completely out of their lives for good. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, like a huge weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Thank you, Jesus, he whispered. Tyler, thank you so much. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this. Don't thank me yet, I warned him. You're going to earn every penny of this money. I'm a tough boss, and I expect excellence from everyone who works for me. I don't care, he said immediately. I'll do whatever you need me to do. I'll work harder than I've ever worked in my life. 6 months later, Brandon had proven himself completely. He was punctual, hardworking, and genuinely grateful for the opportunity I had given him. Tyler and Ashley were absolutely thriving in their new situation. They had good grades, new clothes that actually fit them, and were living in a decent two-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood. Tyler had even gotten a part-time job at one of my construction sites and was showing real natural talent for the work. At Sophie's first wedding anniversary party, Brandon approached me during a quiet moment when we were both standing outside on the patio. "Tyler, I need to tell you something important," he said seriously. "What's that?" "I never really apologized properly for what Madison and I did to you 25 years ago," he said, looking me directly in the eyes. "You're right," I said. "You never did. I was a coward and a complete piece of shit," he continued. "I betrayed my own brother for a woman who turned out to be a snake. There's absolutely no excuse for what I did, and I'm sorry. I'm sorrier than I've ever been about anything in my entire life." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because working for you these past 6 months, seeing how you've built your life and your businesses, seeing how you've helped my kids even after everything we put you through, I finally understand what kind of man you really are. And I finally understand what kind of man I should have been all along." I nodded slowly. "Apology accepted." "Really?" he asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Brandon, I spent 25 years hating you and Madison," I said. "It was exhausting and it consumed way too much of my energy. I'd rather spend whatever time I have left building something better than dwelling on old wounds." He stuck out his hand toward me. "Brothers?" I looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, thinking about everything that had happened between us over the years. Then I reached out and shook it firmly. "Brothers?" I agreed.